And with that, we will begin our program, and we will start with, with Joe Raczynski. Joe joins us from Thomson Reuters. He currently manages a team of technical client managers for both the large law and government divisions. He also serves the top law firms in the world, consulting on trends and customizing Thomson Reuters technology solutions for enhanced workflows. Mr. Raczynski has described blockchain technology as, quote, a significant disruptor on many fronts. And for those of you in this room, blockchain may be something on your radar. It also may be something you don't know a lot about. Joe is going to begin the conversation by simply bringing us all to a baseline understanding of what blockchain is, how it will affect the financial world, financial institutions, and then he will lead us from there. And now I would like to welcome Mr. Joe Raczynski.
Thank you all for coming today. I know today was going to be one of those days that was going to be a whiteout everywhere and change the face of where we're going to be able to get to today. But looking forward to this conversation. I think there's so much happening these days right now with technology and how it's impacting our personal and professional lives. I figure it makes sense to jump in and sort of talk about a few of these things. So we're going to focus in on blockchain. And then we're going to talk a little bit about cryptocurrencies as well. Sort of level set. How many people here have actually invested in cryptocurrencies at this point? By show of hands. Okay, a good number, maybe a third of you all. So let's first take a step back and think about what's actually happening right now for all of us. A brief perspective of technology today. We're going to jump into that and talk about exponential growth. We'll also level set on blockchain. So what is blockchain? How is it going to impact our lives? We'll define it. We'll talk about the history behind it as well. And then we'll jump into how it's going to impact the financial, the regulatory industry as well. It's going to be massive. If you haven't already felt that, it's true. It's coming and it's going to be strong. So how will blockchain and cryptocurrencies also impact AML? And then, of course, we'll jump into the ICOs, all of the cryptocurrencies out there right now. We'll talk about the private coins that are out there, the anonymous coins also that are rearing their heads. So first, indulge me for a second. So let's take a step back. I think we're actually living in an amazing, amazing time. Nothing like we've ever lived before. Generations before us never, ever had the capabilities that we have that we do right now. We're talking about exponential technology, things that are impacting everything around us. The phones that you have. Recently, I saw in Asia, they have a drone that's actually has people in it, and they're flying all over the place. So it is your autonomous vehicle in the sky, that flying vehicle people have been talking about for years. So first and foremost, we're living in these exponential lives right now. All the technology around us is affecting us at that rate. We know what that graph looks like. But if we were to take a step back from that and sort of say, okay, what are we used to? We're used to this linear life. And that is, everything that we know is right in front of us. Everything is something that we've been used to, our family, our relatives, all of those things together. So, for example, if I were to take 30 linear steps from here, I might get back to where you registered, right? So it's about 30 yards. This is something from Singularity University. Our brains have not changed in 250,000 years. I did my DNA test recently for Ancestry.com. And it basically showed up as I had a grandmother far, far removed that grew up on the plains of Africa. So on the eastern plains of Africa. What did we know then? We knew our relatives. We knew where to get food, where to get water. All of those things were linear. That's how our brains have always been thinking. So if we were to actually apply this new philosophy that we're going to have to get used to, this exponential view on the world, what does that feel like? So if we're applying that same sort of sentiment to it, if I were to take 30 exponential steps, how does that look? How does that feel? I'm actually going around the world 26 times. We know what exponential is, of course. It's the doubling of an instance as it continues to grow. So I get up to 1 billion steps rather than that 30 yards that we were talking about before. That's what we're having to get used to. So where is that having an impact on all of us right now? We know the drones. So drones are actually happening right now in Canada. They're going to be doing deliveries probably in the next several years within the US. There are also drones, and I saw the footage recently. In Australia, that basically you are a lifeguard on the beach, you're sitting up there on your chair, and you see someone struggling in the water. It takes you a long time to jump down, run across the beach, get into the water, try to swim through it, and then give them the life preserver. At this stage, they actually have some footage that just came out where the drone takes off, takes about 15 seconds to get there, hovers above them, and drops off that specific life preserver to them. There are also drones right now that are looking for forest fires. So over large swaths of land, they're looking for forest fires. This one's actually creating controlled burns to prevent that in the future. That's one area. Of course, the autonomous cars, we know this, right? So there's a point that I want to make about this. It costs about $5 to $10 billion for Google to produce this. They're in action right now. Tesla now has the autonomous vehicles right now that are working in Arizona, the trucks to do deliveries at this stage. Pittsburgh has the Ubers that are working right now. But what you can do now with this technology, this exponential growth, is that you are actually able to leverage this for even the democratization of this technology, so you can actually put it into your car. You can buy a kit to turn your car into an autonomous vehicle right now, where it cost $5 to $10 billion previously. Now you can do it for $20,000. This is a direction that we're going in. This is where we're going to move. So mobile devices, we know this story, right? So it was about 25 years ago, that phone cost $4,500. It took 10 hours to charge, and it lasted 60 minutes of talk time. Fast forward 10 years ago, we had all those devices, and now we know what we have, right? So these smaller devices that you could fit in your pocket that can do virtually everything. Why? Why is this all happening right now? Why are we starting to think about blockchain, AI, all of that? The first of the trinity of forces, so three distinct forces, is cloud storage. So cloud storage is vastly easier to get a hold of. Just memory. Memory in the cloud is so much easier, so much cheaper. It was $165,000 about 30 years ago. IBM had a mainframe computer half the size of this room. It held 5 megabytes of RAM. Now you can, of course, go onto Amazon, buy a chip the size of your fingernail. That's 400 gigs, that exponential growth curve. So that's the first. The second is processing power. So everything that you have in your phone, in your computers, it's processing faster and faster and faster. Moore's law basically dictates every 12 to 18 months, that's doubling. So we're at the point where if you bought a computer in 2008, and on the x-axis you have time, on the y-axis it's calculations per second. So how fast a computer is moving, is how fast it's working. A $1,000 computer that you would have bought in 2001 had the processing power of a gnat. In 2009, it had the processing power of a rat or a mouse's brain. Fast forward to 2020 to 2024, you're looking at the processing power of the human brain in a $1,000 computer that you'll buy. And then fast forwarding further, a little bit further, you're talking about 2040 to 2044, you're looking at a $1,000 computer will process as fast as all of mankind, projected to be 8 billion people. That's the second force. The third and last force for this is AI, so the algorithms, right? So all these three are working together right now. All these three actually have an effect so that we wouldn't even be talking about blockchain unless we had those going on. So obviously we're here to talk about blockchain. Let's talk a little bit about the history of it first. I think most people are probably aware of this, but if you're not, blockchain actually comes from the underlying technology behind Bitcoin. So 2008, 2009, there was a small financial crisis that I think everyone's aware of that had massive ripple effects across the globe. You had these huge institutions that controlled all of the power, potentially all of the money that were going under. This was a problem. So what people decided to do, and we do not know who actually did this at this point, this is where it gets a little bizarre, an individual or a group of people came together and they put out a white paper. What you see on the left-hand side of the screen is that front page of the white paper. The person that came out with it was Satoshi Nakamoto, akin to like a Jim Smith, a generic name. And what the white paper said was, we see that there are all these central points of failure, potentially banks, potentially government agencies. What can we do to change the entire paradigm? How can we shift that so that it's not a single point, but it's actually distributed? And so what they came out with was this idea of taking that central point of failure and saying, let's do 10,000 computers. 10,000 servers, 10,000 nodes, all the same thing that run the exact same software that have to verify something. They have to verify a transaction. So if I wanted to send Gina $10, and we're going to go to the Bitcoin example first, then we'll talk about the bigger, broader aspects of this. But if I wanted to send Gina $10 worth of Bitcoin, I could do so. What happens is I basically have $10 in my wallet. It's a digital wallet that we're all going to have soon if you don't have one already. It's different than a Visa or MasterCard or your banking wallet. It's something altogether different that we'll get into a little bit later. But the essence of this is that I say, okay, I'm going to send $10 worth of Bitcoin to her. First, I get her digital ID, her wallet number, and we'll show you what that looks like. And then I put $10 into the send. I click send. It goes out. It's broadcast to that entire network of 10,000 servers. You need a consensus. So all of them basically say, okay, does Joe have $10 in his wallet? If so, okay, let's see, does she have a digital ID or wallet? It then verifies it and says, okay, send it. So all those eventually have that information. So every one of those nodes has a ledger or a copy of every single transaction that have ever happened. It's definitely a shift. So back to the definition of blockchain. The way I like to think about it is simply blockchain is a database. That's really all it is, but that it's decentralized and it's distributed. So in the example of Bitcoin, you have roughly 10,000 servers that are all verifying this transaction, and they all have that ledger of information. So I've been involved in this space, I guess, since 2011. I was an early adopter of Bitcoin, which was a happy thing at one point and then very sad in another because I had bought 2 Bitcoin at one point in time, $10 each, and saved it at this Mt. Gox, which is the first exchange that ever existed. It was an exchange that was called Magic the Gathering. So what they first did was they sold and traded cards, collective cards. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, there's this new thing coming out, Bitcoin, let's jump on this. So it was one central point of failure itself and basically allowed people to buy and sell Bitcoin way back when. It eventually went under. I lost my money, learned a lesson, but it was something that was kind of fascinating in and of itself. Okay, so that is at its core. I think it's really important, if most of you probably already know what blockchain is, but to understand this is where the foundation of everything that comes from it is important to talk about. So blockchain at its basis is a distributed database. This is what we were talking about before. So essentially, money goes from one person, it's then broadcast to make sure that whether or not that individual has the money, it's then saved to the blockchain. So I think about the blockchain as a spreadsheet. So every cell of that spreadsheet, there's a bundle of transactions that go into that. So what's happening right now for the industry? 2016, generally an awareness period of time. $3.5 billion has been invested in the last 18 months in this space. The banks, as I'm sure you know, at first were skeptical of this technology. This is something that's for like nerdy people like myself to invest in, to play around with. And then people started digging into this, and they said, okay, wow, this is actually legitimate. It's real. The top 50 banks in the world have gotten involved in it. They're part of a consortium called R3. And everyone's practicing or playing around with this in different blockchains. So there are multiple blockchains out there. Bitcoin has a blockchain, but there are others out there that are very valuable to know about and important to be aware of. So Goldman Sachs, of course, sees major savings in this space. $11 to $12 billion a year for clearing settlements of cash and securities, as well as real estate. This is another huge area. There's a lot of opportunity here for everyone in terms of the partnership that we're talking about to discuss some of these things, to get involved in them if you haven't already. 2017 was the year of the pilots. I've seen law firms setting up blockchain practice areas. Certainly organizations are taking more and more taking Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as payments for things. There are transactions that are happening all over the world in real estate, so people are able to buy real estate with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. That's happening too, which will make some transparency into see what assets people actually have. Because of the nature of this, it makes it much easier. So the real use of technology is certainly happening right now for banking and insurance companies. We'll talk a little bit about some of the cryptocurrencies and what they're doing, what they're leveraging at this point. But this is something that was sort of talked about a few minutes ago. But there is some concerns around this space too when you talk about all the information, all of the money potentially will be decentralized. So individuals now have control over it versus a central point of failure. So if you have a bank that traditionally all of your money is stored in, that may no longer be the case. We're shifting to something where each individual will have their smartphone, everything will be encrypted on that phone, and you will have access to that information, be it your records for your house, for your car, for your own money. All of that is decentralized. You are ultimately in charge of that. You start to think about how you would track that, how you would monitor those things. It's becoming much, much more difficult to do so. There's a lot of challenges here, but there's a lot of opportunity as well. So with all of this, as we're talking about all those wonderful things in the beginning, the technology that's there is so promising, but we face a lot of challenges with it too. So the real use of it, no question. These are generally some companies or organizations to be aware of. Ethereum, so the upper left-hand corner is one that most of the banks are playing around with right now, of course. A lot of other organizations, Thomson Reuters is using that right now to test. So they have their own blockchain, their own database. And basically what's so special about Ethereum is it allows you to program any application, any software that you have and save it to their blockchain to make it possibly publicly available for people to be able to see the chain of events, to track things. So if you're working in AML, hopefully you might be able to track things a little bit better using this. R3, as I mentioned before, is for the banks. Microsoft and IBM are deeply involved in this. It was shocking to me to see this happen so quickly. But IBM, I was at a conference recently, and they normally spend 60 minutes of their talk time strictly on Watson. So it's all on Watson. This year, they actually did something. It was 45 minutes on Watson and then 15 minutes on blockchain because they see these two working really well together. So you talk about a blockchain being immutable, so you cannot change it. It's very secure. It relies on high-end cryptography from the 1970s and 1980s that's tried and true. So mathematical science basically saying that this is true, this is legitimate. And it's applying all these things together along with algorithms. Those algorithms, and in working in concert with the blockchain to save information, it's going to rapidly change things going forward. So where is it going to take off? This is what I'm calling the blockchain of things. I need to change that because it sounds like bot, which we're using for everything else these days. Multiple areas, and I'm going to go through a few of these. I'll skip through some others. I don't think they're going to be as applicable, but smart contracts. How many people have heard of the smart contracts as it applies to the blockchain? Okay, good. A good number of you. We'll do a deeper dive on that just to explain it for others who haven't seen as much about that. Real estate, certainly going to be an area that is touched and impacted by this in terms of tracking information, being able to see the chain of title, all of that. Boardroom, no question, will also be impacted by blockchain. Identity, and this is going to be talked about later, so I'm not really going to spend too much time on this at all. I might cursorily go over it, but something to be aware of. There's going to be new identities soon for all of us. If you think about the 160 million of us in the US that basically had a breach. There was a breach of Equifax, right? So 160 million records were taken. 160 million US citizens, essentially all of your information is down on the dark web right now. Any one of us could go down there and could do searches to find your social security number, your credit history, all of that stuff is there. There's going to have to be a switch. I was at MIT recently and they're talking about how the federal government is looking in this space very, very carefully. But we'll get to that, maybe defer a little bit on that. So chain of title, another area. Authentication, this is also verification of every asset that you might have, which would be helpful, hopefully, for you to be able to track things and find things when necessary. So verification of diamonds. So De Beers is doing this right now. They're tracking diamond from the very beginning of when you pull it out of the mine all the way through till it's on someone's ears or their hand. And you're actually able to track every single piece of this. Various food organizations are doing the same thing, so tracking tomatoes. From when it's pulled off the vine all the way through to the end. You're actually able to see where, if there were any salmonella issues. You could find out within, they say, 60 seconds compared to paperwork, which will take you upwards of, I think they said 4 or 5 days to track those types of things. So the tracking of information is going to be huge in your industry. Having that sort of connection is going to be positive, but there are also some challenges I'll talk about in a second. Notary services will be affected. Rental contracts we may talk about, but Airbnb is vulnerable at this point. So you're talking about a disruptor. Airbnb actually going to have potentially the ability to be upended by blockchain and other things part of that too. So music licensing is also a big piece, but we won't get into any of that. But money transfer, huge. So AML pieces, of course, are around identity as well as money transfer. Certainly smart contracts are a part of that I think are worth mentioning at this point. So let's just really quickly talk about how a smart contract works. And I think this is a fair example to walk you through this. So imagine that you were an attorney and you're crafting a will. The will is really silly. It basically says, upon the parent's death, they have two kids, kid A and kid B. Both kids have to be married upon the parent's death in order for them to split the estate. If one kid is married and one is not, then all the estate goes to one kid. So what's going to happen is that people will draw up these contracts, just like any contract you might see, and then they're going to be codified. So I'm not expecting you're going to go through this code, but I'll walk you through it. So what happens is this document, any document that you have, anything that's going on in someone's life that has value to it, will be loaded into a machine, and it will actually be looking for trigger points. So the first trigger point, using an API, is simply going to call out to a trusted source, an oracle. So an oracle is a trusted source like Thomson Reuters or the federal government, and what will happen is every single day, it'll reach out and say, okay, are the parents alive? If they're not, one day they'll come back and they say, okay, the parents are dead, what's my next task? My next task is actually to see whether or not both kids are married. So again, it's going to check on the blockchain to see whether or not that information's there. It comes back and says, one kid is married, one is not. And then what happens is it says, all right, well, now I know what's next. I transfer all of those, and for the sake of argument, this is all liquid assets. It goes directly to that kid who's married. The smart contract is just a little bit of code that dictates things. So we're going to start to see many more applications out there that are using smart contracts to be able to execute on things automatically. Hopefully it will help in this industry to determine things a little bit more clearly about what's happening, because you'll be able to see the line of execution in terms of what happened when, and then move forward from there. So this is another big one. So imagine you own this island. You've lived on this island for generations, right? One day, the government says, yeah, this is yours. It's been yours. You don't have a deed to it. So basically, 70% of the property around the world does not have a deed. Only 30% does. And obviously, real estate ownership creates wealth, which creates all sorts of wonderful things after that. But the government says it says that you own this at this point in time. All of a sudden, someone whispers in the government's ear and says, hey, you know what? And this might be, maybe in Latin America or maybe in certain parts of the world. Someone whispers in the government's ear and says, hey, we'll give you $10 million for that. And all of a sudden, you don't have a deed, and all of a sudden, it's gone. So what blockchain is going to do, and there's a company called Factum who's working in this real estate area, is going to allow for the deeds to be put onto the blockchain so that you all will be able to see this much more clearly, much more easily. So what will the future look like? There's a lot of things happening here. I think I might sort of breeze through this a little bit, but in essence, in the not too distant future, we're going to have new identities. There's this thought that there's going to be, by the Department of Homeland Security, new Social Security numbers. So in the not too distant future, we may have new identities that are given to us, and they'll be ugly. They're all kind of ugly at this stage. We'll see what happens. They're a long, elongated string of numbers and letters. And you will start to interact with objects. So everything that's connected to the internet these days, you're going to be able to interact with. Be it a smart light bulb. So if you have a smart light bulb at home and has an IP address, it knows what it is at that point in time. It has its own software. You can actually interact with that. So in the case of Airbnb, potentially being disrupted, there's a company called Slockit. They've developed a smart lock for your door. They have a website, basically, you go to, you talk about exactly what your place is. Maybe you have a flat in London, it's close to the tube, all these wonderful things. You go there, you confirm that this is the place you want to go to, then you show up at the door of the place that you're going to move into, and you're interacting with that object, which in this case is the lock. You're then able to go out to the blockchain and interact with that smart contract. So the contract is digital, it's there. It's something you'll be able to track going forward. And then going back, you'll be able to say, okay, when the person leaves, they'll be able to call up your actual cleaning service to come in. So it's all connected. So you're talking about the blockchain with the Internet of Things, with all of that combined together. So now, I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but I think it's important. When I was a little kid and I started messing around with the internet, early days, like email had just come out. And I was the first person I knew who actually had email. And I was like, all right, so there's my name at some squiggly symbol, CompuServe.com. And I was like, what is this? And it didn't make sense to me. We're at the point where we're all going to have digital wallets. If you don't have one now, you probably will have one in the next several years. It's something to spend some time on. So if you wanted to get involved in cryptocurrency because it's something that is something I think we all have to wrap our heads around, I'd say it's worthwhile. Coinbase is the most recognized in the US at this stage. It's based in San Francisco. It's an exchange where you would go to, you essentially transfer some fiat currency dollars into, and you're able to actually buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some of these other platforms. Clearly, we know that there's been some changes over the last several years in this space, and it's gone from roughly $1,000 got up to $19,000 for Bitcoin, and then it's settling around $10,000 right now. But it is something I think is worth investigating and playing around with. So when we're starting to talk about AML issues in this space, I think it's also important to be aware of how easy it is to come up with currencies that are going to be non-trackable, non-traceable. And I am still grappling, I've talked with a few people about this recently, there are coins out there, there are currencies out there right now that are completely anonymous. Bitcoin is not. Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous, which means that once you tie that digital address to your name, then people can figure it out. The FBI is doing that right now. They're able to figure out things. You look at the dark web, and Bitcoin used to be all over the dark web. It's not really there anymore. There's other coins that have jumped up that we'll talk about in a second that are proliferating. So if any of you wanted to, you could actually create your own business right now, create your own cryptocurrency. It's very easy to do. I have a blog about it, basically walks you through the entire thing. You can do it in about 60 minutes, where you create the coin, you can then write a white paper about it, but this is how it's done. So most of the ICOs right now, so the initial coin offerings that are happening right now, and a little history on that, it's akin to an IPO, so an initial public offering, of course, but you are doing this privately. There's no SEC involvement. You can skirt a lot of different things at this stage. It's going to change probably very, very soon. But right now, you develop your own website. You write a white paper. The white paper says, okay, this is what our company does. This is what we're going to work on. This is what we're going to come out with. You actually do a purpose, of course, the timeline. The timeline is when you are going to allow people to come to your website and take the Bitcoin that they've bought off of Coinbase, and then in exchange get some other cryptocurrency for it. So you go to the website, let's say from March 15th through the 30th, you've read the white paper, you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, I want to invest in this company. Then you donate. So to skirt the SEC issues right now, you're actually donating your Bitcoin or your Ethereum, another cryptocurrency, to them. So you're putting in their specific digital wallet ID, and you're sending that money off to them. So let's say you have big money and you're donating one Bitcoin, which is $10,000 to them. What do you get in exchange? You get essentially 10,000 of their coin. It's like 10,000 shares from them, which you are then putting into your digital wallet. So all this is happening on the blockchain, so it's saved to the blockchain. So you're safe, secure. You hold on to that in your digital wallet, and then you're like, all right, what do I do with these? I have 10,000 of these coins. What happens to that? Well, you hold on to it, and this is where things are getting kind of zany. So you eventually get to the point where you wait about a month, and then there's 140 cryptocurrency exchanges around the world. They're all over the place. I mean, you have some in Russia, you have some in China, you have them everywhere. They all have different regulations, and sometimes they have no regulation whatsoever. But you take your coins over, you port them over, and then that's where people are buying and selling them. And people have made, obviously, millions of dollars off this stuff. I was at a conference about 6 months ago, and there must have been 2,500 people there in the city here. And most people were cryptocurrency millionaires at that point. Things have ebbed and flowed. There's been a lot of mini crashes in the last, let's say, month or two. But this is a massive impact. And for anybody who wants to sort of create a whole new coin that would avoid any regulation, they could do so right now fairly easily. So once the period's over, of course, you can do whatever you want with those coins. This is a screenshot, and unfortunately you can't see the very top of it, but it talks about how quickly this has changed. These are the top 10 cryptocurrencies out there right now. Bitcoin, the granddaddy of them all, been around the longest, of course. But the very top, it basically says how many coins are out there right now, or how many coins or tokens. And I'll make a distinguishing point between those two in just a second. But there are roughly 1,540 different cryptocurrencies right now. The market cap has fluctuated from maybe a year and a half ago. It was maybe 15 billion. It got up to $750 billion. And now it's resting around 450 billion. That's massive. I mean, governments around the world are saying, what in the world? How can we handle this? How can we take care of this? It's creating all sorts of problems. But there's a lot of opportunity there as well. So I think one of the important things to realize is that each one of these is potentially slightly different. They're companies or they're nonprofit organizations. Bitcoin is just it's basically just its own little thing, right? So no one runs it. Any one of you here right now could participate in Bitcoin by simply getting an expensive server at this point, putting it off the corner, firing up the software that you need to have, connecting to the internet, and then having it mine. So when it's mining, it's basically confirming that I sent money to Gina earlier. There's two ways of mining, but we won't get into too much of the detail around that. But one of the primary ways of mining essentially is confirming, being one of those 10,000 servers, it's saying, yes, this actually happened. So Bitcoin is a currency, right? So it's trying to be like a fiat currency. It's trying to be like the dollar, the yen, or euro. The distinction between that and a token, and this is important, a token does something. There's utility tokens out there. Ethereum, the second most popular one up there, where all the banks are using, it allows you to do something. So if you had a contract or you had something that you wanted to save to the blockchain, and you can save anything you want to the blockchain. If you had a digital copy of War and Peace, you can save it to the blockchain. Why would you want to do that? I don't know, but you could do that. So you essentially, basically, every time you want to save it to that database, you upload it to the blockchain, but you have to pay for that to be saved there. And you pay in the token that's part of that. So Ethereum has Ether. You can pay for the token. It has a value to it. But every single time you were to upload something to that blockchain, you're talking about paying, I think I sent $400 to myself recently using Ether, and it cost 37 cents. So the positive of some of this stuff is that, yes, you can send money very easily. But the negative is that, yes, I could send $1 million if I had it right now to someone in Iran, someone in North Korea, very easily. It takes about 20 minutes to do that. All they need is a digital wallet. It bypasses the government agencies. It bypasses all of the banking systems. And you might say that that's a small problem, unfortunately, that we're going to have to figure out. And when we're talking about this partnership, it's really about coming up with ideas to how can we handle this? How can we take care of this? How can we work together to try to figure these things out? Some of this stuff is very complicated, and it's going to be creating some problems for people. So I'm not going to spend time on this because normally I'll jump into this, but basically what you see on the right-hand side is it shows you how many transactions are happening right now for Bitcoin. So on the one on the right-hand side, I know it's not the easiest to see. The block that you see that's numbered, that's actually a block like a cell in an Excel spreadsheet. That's basically the aggregate of all the transactions that are happening right now that are being stored. The balls that are dropping are transactions that are happening in real time. The bigger the ball, the more the transactions. There might be like 1,000 Bitcoin, which could be $1 million. That's actually being transacted all over the world, and it's happening right now. And they just keep falling because, again, it's all bypassing everything. Things that, of course, we all have to be worried about a little bit. So these are two that you all may have seen or played around with. These are two cryptocurrencies that expressly want to be private. So there is no way to track anything on Monero or Zcash. They have their own digital IDs, but as soon as I send money from my digital ID to somebody else, it expires, it disappears. They have very impressive technology, but when it comes to AML issues, I personally cannot, at this point, figure out how we're going to be able to track this. I'd love to hear if anybody has any ideas on that at some point later when we go to questions. But this is a significant area that I think we all have to be mindful of. When we talk about all the opportunity within AML, with the blockchain to track things, and there's going to be a lot of that when it comes to public records, other pieces of information about real estate, your own identity. For money, straight up money, if people want to bypass that right now using these, they can. So we'll have to, and the problem is, people might say, well, at some point you're going to want to change that into like fiat currency, into dollars, whatever the case is. But what we're starting to see is that more places around the world are starting to take these currencies. So once you transfer money in there, it may be there forever. For Bitcoin, if any money I ever put into Bitcoin, why would I ever want to take it out anymore? It doesn't necessarily make sense because other places are starting to take it. I know people that are taking Bitcoin for real estate transactions. There's a lot of things we have to start thinking about in this space as we partner together. I'm not going to go through this for the sake of time, but there are countless websites that talk about all of these new coins that are coming out. When I first started getting involved in this, there were maybe 3 a week that would come out of these cryptocurrencies. Now it's like dozens and dozens a week. They're constantly flowing. Each one of them has a different intent. Sometimes they're around new currencies. Sometimes they're around new business models. A lot of them are on the up and up, but there are certainly a bunch that are not. There are exchanges I mentioned. There's 140 exchanges. BTC-E was one based in Russia, and it was taken down maybe 3 or 4 months ago because they were the biggest money launderer of all. If you ever had money over there, they would easily churn that and give you whatever you wanted to very easily. So some quick implications, and I got to be careful here with time. Certainly law firms are involved in this space. There are class action suits happening all the time. So the blockchain itself truly has not been hacked. Most of them have not been hacked. If you hear about hacks, it happens outside. So it's people falling victim to digital wallets and clicking on things they shouldn't be clicking on or downloading things that they should not be downloading. The SEC has released warnings in July of 2017. We know the AML issues here. How do you track some of these privacy coins? When? Where is it going? FinCEN actually came out with something, I think, yesterday, a little more detail about what's happening in that space. But clearly, our federal government is looking at this very, very carefully and moving forward with it. And then taxes. At this stage, it looks like if you have a cryptocurrency and you've made money off of it, it's being taxed like a property. So it's seen as a property with that space. This, I think we could probably talk offline. There's a lot of other information that we can provide, but given the timing, I might go a little bit further. CFTC also came out with some guidance recently that you can read right there. Treasury Department, everyone's starting to get involved, and around the world, government agencies are also doing the same. It's something obviously to be aware of. So almost in conclusion. So in the beginning, we had, of course, the internet, right? So the first true killer app was email. Then it was web, believe it or not. And then smartphones, then apps. And Uber, to me, seems like the best example of everything that's good that's happening. It knows where you are. It has the payment systems in it. Everything is wrapped into that. It's incredible. So right now, we are essentially at the beginning again. So blockchain and the tokenization of all assets. So every asset that you have in the not too distant future will be tokenized. So a painting that you have that you care about, your car, real estate, will all be represented by a digital token. And we're not talking about too far away. So when you get into the AML and tracking of information and all that stuff, that's going to be a major component to this. So we're at the beginning. So this is the early stages, as I'm sure you all are aware of. A lot of things happening, and they're happening very, very fast. So I guess I'll stop pretty much there. These are some terms that you may or may not be aware of. there's a lot of things happening. So the challenges, skeptics, certainly there's a lot of skeptics in this area. This all came from ideological motives, right, and establishment. So do away with the banks, do away with the government agencies. Those are the roots. I don't think that's actually going to happen. There's tons of regulatory pieces that will be coming in the not too distant future. But I will conclude there because I know we have some time for in between sessions. But thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.